I call Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Chair. In this bill, there's generally a need to balance public interest and private interests. And that includes balancing the need for unnecessary inquests, but at the same time, the need for full transparency. And also, there needs to be a balance between the freedom of the media to report deaths and their circumstances without sensationalising them or encouraging copycat suicides. And there needs to be a balance to inquire fully into deaths which occur in official custody. But at the same time, we should be avoiding pointless inquiries so that some discretion can safely be used to avoid them. There needs to be a balance between independent inquiry for deaths of defence personnel in all circumstances where the deceased was not in hostile action and the circumstance where the death was in a hostile action situation, so that the balance then would be a need for a transparent inquiry where that's really required, and the need for the protection of the national interest. So there are a lot of balancing acts to be thought about when going through this particular piece of information. I only wanted to comment, however, not on the bill itself, because I've expressed in previous speeches what New Zealand First's position is on that. So the 4 SOPs I wanted to comment on were, first of all, the 2 that Jacinda Ardern, they are numbered 145 and 146, has submitted. And they relate to the new section 57C, and the question is whether it should be mandatory for a government agency, and this is dealt with in SOP 146, or anyone else in SOP 145, to respond or not to recommendations by a coroner. And New Zealand First will support whichever of those SOPs turns out to be successful, and I hope that at least SOP 146 is, because we think that that's appropriate. There should never be a situation where a government agency can simply ignore the recommendations of a coroner. That's not appropriate, nor should such an agency ever feel that it can simply brush off without a reasonable response recommendations made by a coroner. Now, this doesn't mean that the response has to be of any particular kind, but it needs to be genuine and comprehensive, well considered, and a proper response to the recommendations by a coroner. We think that, therefore, that this SOP, or whichever one of the 2 is successful, is harmless, worthwhile, and would make a genuine contribution to upholding the effectiveness of the office of coroners. And we also think that the 60-day period is a reasonable period as set out in the SOPs within which those responses should be made. So we'd support that one. The 3rd SOP I wanted to comment on was that submitted by Calvin Davis to delete clause 41, which deals with the new section 80. And we feel that we cannot support that SOP. We believe that there does need to be a discretion exercised where there is a death in official custody, and that discretion being whether to hold an inquiry into the death or not. We accept what the new section 80 says, the criteria that are set out there as to whether the coroner should exercise a discretion in favour or against having an inquiry. So we want to see that section remains, that new section remain in the legislation. So we would not support Calvin Davis's SOP to delete it. The 4th and last one I wanted to comment on was Phil Goff's SOP regarding...
I'm sorry to interrupt the member. All the amendments that you're referring to are in part 2, and we're on part 1 of the bill.
Debating the whole of the bill?
No, it's part by part. So can you just come back to part 1? Yeah.
Well, in that case, I'll leave it there and I'll come back to this when the appropriate time comes.
Paul.